Let me first introduce our speaker and the moderator for today. And yeah, so basically, yeah, we are starting. Yeah, so welcome to the colloquium of this computing at KAIST. And I'm Min Sung, basically hosting this colloquium with Alice here. And today we're gonna have a very special form of the webinar with a very special guest, Kristie Lu Stout here. We invited Kristie today not to actually discuss any kind of some specific research topics, but actually to discuss a broader topic, which is basically how technology basically offers of the hope in the world. And Kristie is a award-winning anchor and also correspondent for the CNN based in Hong Kong. And she reports from the newsroom and in the field of the major, the breaking news, the stories, including the US-China relations and the Hong Kong's, the changing the political landscape and also the coronavirus, the pandemic, and also the aftermath of the extreme climate events in the region. And she also hosts the feature programs for CNN. Most recently was the Presenting the Tech for Good, where she basically interviews the entrepreneurs and the experts and also the businesses developing some innovative ways to battle and navigate the COVID-19, the health crisis. And with her program, Inventing Tomorrow, taking a time of the pandemic, she also was awarded the best COVID-19 lecturer of the feature at the 2020 the Content Asia Awards. And also among the multiple honors in the 2020, she and also her CNN the Hong Kong colleagues were awarded the best continuing news reporting for the TV and the video by the Association for the International Broadcasting for team coverage of the 2019 the Hong Kong protests. And also in 2018, she was awarded Best News or the Current Affairs presenter at the Asian Academy the Creative Awards, while the news program she also conceived called the News Stream was also awarded Best News Program. And Kristie also visited KAIST about 10 years ago, right? And with her, she eye on the South Korea, and also she showcased the OLED buses in our campus, and also the humanoid robot, the Hubo. So welcome back, Kristie, and it's also my great honor to have you here in this kind of the conversation. And so today we're gonna have a online sort of the fireside chat with Kristie and also Alice here. Basically, Alice will moderate the chat. And for the audience, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand in the Zoom and also post the questions in the Zoom chat. So Alice will take it away.
Okay, so nice to have you here, Kristie, again. So first, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure, and thank you so much for the introduction, Minyuk and Alice. It's wonderful to reconnect. Good to see you again, and thank you for inviting me to speak to your students at KAIST. My name is Kristie Lu Stout. I'm an anchor correspondent at CNN based here in Hong Kong. It is a job that I've held here for almost 20 years. And I'm delighted to be here. I've traveled and visited KAIST before, and also just to be reconnected again to Alice. Alice and I were old classmates together back in Lynbrook High School in Silicon Valley in the 80s and 90s. In fact, we used to do Oxford team debate together and to compete as a high school team. And Alice, you'd be tickled to find out that recently the Oxford Student Union actually invited me to take part in the real Oxford team debate. And the topic was, the House believes we cannot survive in the era of big tech. And I always thought, oh, what if like Alice and I could could come together and take that on as a topic, but maybe argue against that. Unfortunately, wasn't able to take part in that debate, but really happy to be part of this conversation with all of you.
Oh, great. Yeah, we go, that was too long ago, right? 80s and 90s. We're telling the students how old we are. So you were here back in 2009. You visited KAIST, and as Minyuk said, you talked about the OLEV, our bus system, and Hubo, the robot. So what do you remember from that visit, and what things have changed since then?
Yeah, it was a great visit. This happened in 2009. We had a series called Eye on South Korea, where we talked about different cultural trends, business trends, and also high-tech trends in Korea. And I got an opportunity to visit the KAIST campus and to see and to ride and to try out electrified or electric transport in the form of the bus that you just mentioned. Also to meet and interact with on live morning TV, no less, Hubo, which was the KAIST University humanoid robot. Of course, a lot has changed since then. You know, this again was over a decade ago. We've seen electric transport become much more mainstream. Also, we've seen robotics evolve as well, becoming even more intelligent, thanks to what you're doing at KAIST, work in artificial intelligence as well as machine learning.
Yeah, you have to come visit again, of course.
Yeah,
when
would love to.
Pandemic is over. So what have you been working on lately?
Yeah, well, lately it's all been about two things, right? It's been about pandemic and politics, and a lot about COVID, and a lot about a very tense geopolitical world. But I continue to cover technology, and I absolutely love covering the technology beat because it gives me hope, because technology is a story about human creation and innovation. So in a time of despair and destruction, it's this sort of beacon of light that we can see how can the best minds of humankind come together and to figure out, how do we solve these problems. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about this old popular mantra from Silicon Valley, which was move fast and break things. I think it was popularized by Mark Zuckerberg back in the day. Not too long ago, it was really popular to be a disruptor, to be someone in the technology industry who is well known for upending entire industries or breaking old business models and refashioning anew. And that way of thinking has become completely outmoded and out of date, given the amount of problems that we have in the world today, whether it's pollution, climate change, poverty, inequality, etc. And now what's very exciting is when I talk to and cover technologists, and in the technology industry, there's this greater sensitivity, this greater almost humility about how can we use technology to solve a problem without creating new problems. Because we have a lot of dumpster fires already. We don't need technology to contribute to a new dumpster fire. How do we solve these problems without creating new ones? And that is a paradigm shift in thinking in the tech industry that's been happening, in the last couple of years, I think is really wonderful to see.
Yeah, so that brings us to your show, Tech for Good. I wonder how and when it got started, and can you just tell us about that show?
Yeah, Tech for Good is a project that that came about I think about 2 years ago, and it's sponsored by Samsung. And it's about the transformative power of technology to change people's lives for the better. And we would try to find and unearth these stories that were kind of like bits of gold dust, that they were out there. They're wonderful examples of how technology can be used and harnessed to solve a problem or to improve someone's life. And so, for example, we recently did a show, and we're now in the second season, which was focused on health. So looking at whether it's VR or wearables, or even some sort of, exoskeleton, hardware, et cetera, how technology can be used to improve people's health. And I had the opportunity to meet this young woman who is the CEO of a group called Embodied Labs based in California. And what she's doing is she's using virtual reality to allow caregivers to step into the feet of the people who they're caring for. Her story is very interesting because when she was just a teenager, she was just a student, her mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So she found herself that she had to become her mother's caregiver. Mm-hmm. And it was very difficult for her to explain to doctors or nurses about her mother's situation. So she described how her mother, her field of vision in one eye would be impeded. So if she sat down to eat and would have a plate of food in front of her, she would only eat half of the food on the plate because that was only the amount of food that she could see. Mm-hmm. A number of caregivers thought, oh, she doesn't want to eat anymore, and they would take her food away. So as a sort of pre-tech, as a teenager, just mocking up a prototype, she took a pair of goggles and some duct tape, and she recreated her mother's field of vision with the goggles. And she could give that to the caregiver, say, this is how my mother sees. So it's not because she's not hungry, it's because she can't see it. And immediately the caregiver could say, I understand. So what she did is she ended up starting up her own technology industry where virtual reality can be employed to provide that level of understanding. So it's imbuing empathy and compassion in technology so that we could better treat individuals who need our help. But I thought that was just such a powerful example. Yeah. We also did another show on conservation, agriculture, sustainable agriculture, interviewed this man, Jonathan Webb, who is the CEO of App Harvest. And he's saying the planet is running out of food. And we need to think of smarter ways using technology to grow more food. So he's creating it's ag tech. So these high-tech greenhouses that are using a host of digital or technologies inside to streamline crop growing. So whether it's using hybrid lighting, so figuring out when they need to use LEDs versus sunlight. So, you could use, harness nature when you can, or using robots, harvesters, autonomous harvesters, using digital monitoring and AI to be able to maximize the crop. And that's an idea that he started using it in Kentucky in the middle of the heartland in America, and he wants it to go worldwide. And there's, a lot of greater interest in that.
So you can basically grow more things, get more produce. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds, those two examples sound wonderful. Just wonderful use of technology. What is the next step? What are some of the next Tech for Good projects you're working on?
Yeah, the latest show that just came out, I think just about 2 weeks ago, was on education. So online learning. Also, there was a very interesting innovation. Its name is Moxie. I don't know if you've studied it. Or I feel like this is something that you and your students should get one just to break it apart, go inside and figure out how it works. So Moxie is this little animated robot that basically is designed as a learning buddy or a social learning buddy for a child. So it has a little blue body, has these big sort of anime-like eyes on a screen. It has the ability to be able to do facial recognition, to track the eyes of the child, to help the child go through emotional as well as cognitive development activities. So, for example, learning how to take turns, learning how to do problem solving, play-based learning. It would give the child some challenges. How about today? You write a letter to someone who did something nice to you, et cetera. And it represents something just out of this world. And I don't know. I don't know if this is something I would have wanted to purchase for my own daughter when she was at that age. But when you think of the kids who are stuck in quarantine in a room by themselves, maybe with adults need some time, to work on their own business, what have you, and to maybe just carve out 30 minutes with, let's say, a very intelligent, animate, friendly toy. I could see why there would be a reason for that. So I thought that was a really interesting, example about AI in education and technology. The next show is coming out, and it's on a very interesting topic, which is fitness technology. So and so we profile. There's a company out of Taiwan, and they've come up with a smart baseball called the Strike Baseball. It has a number of high-tech sensors inside. So players and their coaches, by using this baseball, can understand like the velocity, the rotational axis, the trajectory, to get all this data from the pitch or from the hit, so they can fine-tune their performance. And it's the same technology that can be transferred from a baseball to a rugby ball or to other sports as well. I just did an interview, a really fascinating company called Black Box VR. And what they're doing is they're trying to gamify the workout experience. So when you go to this gym, and they have 2 gyms, one in Idaho where the founder is based and one in San Francisco, right across from the Twitter headquarters, actually. You walk into a private workout room, you put on a VR headset. You also put on these mitts that also, these controllers that provide like location information, for the system. And then you're brought through a game where you're kind of in a coliseum or an arena. You're a gladiator. You have an avatar, and you have to go back and pull these cables and free weights and to do these workout challenges to be able to win the game.
Yeah.
And through gamifying fitness, you actually get your workout out, but you don't feel that you're working out. And I just thought that was a really interesting concept.
Yeah. Yeah. We all need that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it looks like, it sounds like the three technologies that mentioned are actually related to the pandemic, or at least they're going to be a little bit more useful because of the pandemic. Is that true?
Yeah. It's funny how the pandemic has really shined a light on problems that had already existed but needed a solution, right? Or to show the worth of a technology that had already been there for a long time, but was underappreciated. For example, online learning. You know, there have been champions of MOOCs, you know, those massive online classrooms that have been out there for well over a decade. And they've been talking about how do you properly design an online course so it's engaging, so that learning and retention of information can take place, you know, all of that. And it took a pandemic for people to realize the important work that these pioneers were doing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then of course the added benefit was, you know, do we need to commute as much anymore? Do we need to pay rent for that kind of facility to do that type of work anymore? Is this something that could be done in a smaller space? And then you have an add-on benefit for not just convenience, but also for the environment too.
Right.
And yeah, so the pandemic has, I guess, you know, that's the silver lining.
Silver lining. Yeah, yeah. Right. So we can take advantage of, you know, the good things about online interactions and face-to-face, even after the pandemic, I think.
Yeah.
So your show, Inventing Tomorrow, was launched during the pandemic, I suppose, to tackle the pandemic, right? But it seems like it's now shifted focus a little bit more to climate change.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So we're in the second season of Inventing Tomorrow. And the show is about, you know, the innovators, the businesses, and the pioneers coming up with solutions to mitigate the effects of climate change, you know, or to somehow just, you know, just shore up the value of whether it's biodiversity, or to make people pay more attention, or to do works to save the planet. So the most recent program was on coastal conservation. So it was very much focused on the oceans and ocean economy. And one story was done out here in Hong Kong, which was about coral reef protection. Believe it or not, Hong Kong does have coral reefs. And one government statistic says that Hong Kong has more coral species, or as many coral species as the Caribbean, which is incredible. But I did go out on the only glass bottom boat in Hong Kong, was able to see firsthand over 20 different coral species that are living here off the coast of Hong Kong, one of the busiest, you know, financial capitals and shipping capitals of the world.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But as you know, because of coastal building, because of coral bleaching, climate change, a lot of coral species are under threat. And when coral is under threat, that also rocks the ecosystem, that rocks marine life that usually would thrive and dwell in these, you know, beautiful marine areas. So one PhD student at the Hong Kong University, she has created a solution using 3D printing technology, where she 3D prints this sort of tile that mimics the shape of brain coral. And then she takes this sort of terracotta tile and she puts it in areas where there's no coral, there's no area for the coral to latch onto. And it encourages the coral to latch onto and to grow. And then of course, with that, the marine life comes back to life. We have clownfish in Hong Kong. I've been in Hong Kong for 20 years. I had no idea. Little Nemos. They exist in Hong Kong. But if we want more little Nemos, we need to pay more attention to the marine ecosystems, and also, you know, think of these types of, you know, creative solutions. Another one that was profiled in the show was called Bedrock Ocean. So apparently, you know, we know more about the surface of Mars than about the surface of the seafloor. And it is very time consuming. It's technologically difficult to go out and do a proper mapping of the ocean floor. So what this group has done, and this is created by young American technologists, is they've created an underwater drone that can go out and it travels in a way that it's not high speed. It does not give off any sonar or emit any, how do you say it? Let's say signals that would disturb marine life. But it would slowly pick up the data that you would need to map the seafloor. And we also profiled a separate technology company called SeaTrek. And what they've done is they found a way to sustainably power these underwater drones, because when they go out to sea, eventually they're going to run out of energy. But they found a way that these underwater drones can harness the waves of the oceans around them and be able to charge themselves renewably. So then these underwater drones could travel out farther and for a longer period of time. So yeah, it's just, very
it's incredible.
Interesting sister technologies there.
Yeah. Incredible. So some of these technologies are mentioning here, VR, drones, all of these are technologies that our students are actually working on here at KAIST. It's really great to see that, you're profiling these companies that are actually taking these to market. So yeah, it's great.
That's really exciting. And I think it's wonderful for, your students to continue to be interested and engaged in what happens outside of the technology space, because that's when you identify where the problems are.
Right.
So if you read up on whatever your passion is, maybe it's about fitness, or maybe it's about marine life, maybe it's education, or maybe it's how do we wean ourselves from a meat-based diet? What can you as a technologist bring to solve this problem? That's very exciting.
Yeah. So another show that you're doing, Marketplace Asia. Tell us about that show.
Yeah, so Marketplace Asia just launched earlier this year, and I co-host that with my colleague Selena Wang, who's based in Tokyo, and we profile business in Asia. So the focus is definitely on the region. And recently we did a show on apps and super apps in Southeast Asia. As you may or may not know, some of the largest social media consumers, e-commerce consumers are out of Southeast Asia, especially when you have markets like Indonesia, which is so massive. And I interviewed a CEO, a very young guy, of a company called Carousel. It's based out of Singapore, and it's part of the re-commerce market. So not quite an eBay or a Craigslist, but it's more like selling used goods, but using the app. It's very mobile centric because he identified for his target audience, they don't use laptops. They really want to be able to do it, have a clean user interface so you can complete a transaction within just, a couple of swipes. It started with a university grant, $5,000 in 2012, and they have become the newest unicorn in Singapore in the last year or so. So they're now a $1 billion company, and they're selling even homes, gadgets, old Halloween costumes, cars, homes. Anything could be sold off of this app.
Oh, that's great. Anything that has better UI than eBay.
Yeah.
Craigslist, right? Craigslist has really bad UI.
Yeah, and this is what's cool is because he is I think he's almost Generation Z / millennial. He knows what his generation likes. They've given up on laptop and computing. They're not going to buy something on PC. They're going to buy it on the go with their mobile phones. So, but he has that sensitivity about UI design. Right? If it's not going to work for me, it's not going to work for my audience. And that's also the reason why as he ages, so, then what people will tend to buy also changes as well. Right. So maybe at the beginning it was used textbooks. And then now it's the first apartment,
Yeah, that's great. So my last question before we turn to the student questions is about CNN's first Call to Earth Day. That is next week. What is this? What's happening on this day?
Yeah, so with CNN, in addition to doing the news and covering events, we also like to think of ways to sort of engage students around the world. So we've done this in the past with My Freedom Day, with My Freedom Project, which is an ongoing campaign to end modern day slavery. And because of the scale of the climate crisis, we decided to turn Call to Earth, which was a documentary series, into a Call to Earth Day, which is a day of action to engage students, these are namely high school students around the world, to really express and act upon the sense of urgency about saving the planet. So my colleagues and I, on this Call to Earth Day, which is happening November the 10th, we will be reporting live from different high schools all over the world, talking about what students at that given place are doing to, whether it's raise awareness, fundraising, or to do something to sort of make a mark to just bring down the levels of pollution and climate damage. In addition to that, I just filed a report that will be airing for the first time on that day about ghost gear. And this was a phenomenon I didn't even know about until I started researching this story. So ghost gear is lost, abandoned, or discarded fishing gear that is just stuck at sea. And there's this incredible UN statistic. We all know plastic waste in the ocean is a huge problem. We've heard of the plastic vortex, right? We've seen the horrible images of, you know, the albatross, the bird, and you cut open the stomach and it's full of garbage inside, and it's plastic waste. According to the UN, some 10% of the plastic waste at sea is ghost gear. So 10% is fishing nets, hooks, cages that is just lost or just left out there. And not only is it unsightly, you know, it's a form of trash. More importantly, it takes lives away. It's dangerous to humans. If you get caught up in a ghost net, you can die, but especially for marine life. And you have some vast ghost nets that are drifting about in the ocean that are entrapping everything along with it, and just destroying marine life and the marine environment. So I went out with this, he was a pretty tough dude. He was a 69-year-old retired businessman who's a scuba diver, and he goes hunting for ghost gear. He takes a scuba diving boat, brings out his experienced scuba diving friends, and he goes out hunting for the gear, and it's really hard work. So we follow them along with our crew. We also brought along an underwater camera operator to film what was happening underwater. And it takes a while to find it. There is a community. People would geotag saying, I know there's ghost gear here. Can someone please pick it up? So we followed the geotag. It took us a while to find it, but we did. Then you have to dive under the water, and then you have to carefully extract it if it's entangled on coral or anything else. You have to cut it out, bring it back up. And then of course, inevitably there's a lot of dead life in there. I mean, there's dead sea creatures in there, oysters, you know, crabs, etc. But we also found, you know, some creatures that were still alive remarkably, and we were able to just take them out of the ghost gear and the ghost net and let them free. So anyway, that is going to be a phenomenon that we hope to raise awareness about when we report on Call to Earth Day on November the 10th from Hong Kong.
Okay, that sounds like a lot of fun. So what time during that day will be the high school part? I'd like to watch.
Oh, okay. It's going to be throughout the day.
Oh, really?
We'll be starting live from around midday in Asia, and then yes, for a few hours, and then I'll also be sure to, you know, cut and share any clips online and on social media, because I realize some people, you know, it's especially the younger generation, they see,
they don't want to watch out the whole thing.
Yeah, it's like sometimes it's like, oh, I could see it on Instagram or see it on another platform. Yeah, but the content will be out there, and it'll also be on CNN.com. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So you told us about all these things, and students had some very interesting questions. And I think this first question is very relevant, and I'm very interested to know too, because you've talked about all these different stories you're working on. So your day must be full and so busy. You have to do research, you have to report, you have to, you know, record. What is your daily life like?
Yeah, it depends on what you're working on that day. So, you know, for example, if it's you know, the very first thing we do is you wake up in the morning, you read in, how did the world change overnight? I may even get some WhatsApp messages from colleagues, heads up, this speech was said, we're going to need to get some reaction, or there's interest in finding out this angle to the story. I think you're going to be working on this today. Every day, 8:45 a.m., we have that editorial meeting where we have that group regional, to and fro, and to figure out what are the top stories of the day, how do we build upon existing coverage, and what individuals and also teams will be tasked to do. And then you just start working. You start preparing, you start researching, you start interviewing. Of course, if you're doing a topic like China GDP or zero COVID policy, you want to talk to your Rolodex of experts to check in to see if they have any fresh ways of thinking or maybe tips that you may need to advance the story. And then the live coverage begins. And even with the live coverage, you have to think about, is there interest to package this up into a TV story, because there are a lot of interesting visual elements for this. And in addition to that, there is a number of other projects. I mentioned, Inventing Tomorrow and Marketplace and Tech for Good. Those are more long-term kind of magazine type feature examples of journalism. So I would have to figure out when can I work on that, or when can I figure it, which day am I going to be focused on that instead. So there is no typical day. But I guess the most important thing is that 8:45 a.m. call in the morning, figure out what changed overnight, what are some new editorial demands that are coming in that you have to meet.
And within all that crazy day, you have to somehow figure out the technology, or you have to learn about the technology that you talk about too. So one of the students was wondering, how do you learn about these new technologies?
Yeah, I mean, you constantly talk to people, you constantly try out new things. Over the years, this may seem like, oh, of course, everyone knows that, but there was a time people didn't know what Wikipedia was. And I remember it was a university professor who grabbed me in the early noughts who said, you need to do a story on Wikipedia because this is going to change. And I ended up doing the first explainer on CNN for Wikipedia. Also, this seems old hat now, but a few years ago, another contact pulled me aside and said, you need to go to DJI and see what they're doing with consumer drones. And sure enough, I got the heads up and did the explainer on consumer drones, the first one for CNN too. So building up your contact base, being able to listen. I do get pitched a lot. I do read and respond to the pitches. I mean, of course, cannot guarantee coverage, but you have to have that open ear. But in addition to that, you got to read a lot. And when I say read a lot, it's not just nonfiction, but fiction as well. Really? I think it's really important to read a lot of science fiction. Some of my favorite authors are sci-fi authors, or those who have dabbled in the genre, like China's Cixin Liu or Kazuo Ishiguro, who just wrote a fabulous book on artificial AI friends called Clara and the Sun, like Margaret Atwood, who has written a lot about not just dystopian futures for women, but about biotech. Recently I got into the short stories of Ted Chiang, who is a Chinese American sci-fi author. And, he also writes a lot about AI. And especially in regards to the work that you do, and all of you do at KAIST, I think it's interesting to read fiction as well, because it's in the realm of, it seems impossible, but could be a possibility that you could build towards one day. And then also there's that element of, well, what if that reality is built? How does it change humankind? How does it change the way people interact with one another? Is this something else that we need to keep in mind, because there could be this unintended consequence as a result of this tech tool? So I think that's something that's really important to do. Oh, but another thing about technology is, best thing to do is also to try it as a reporter. You actually have to try it on. You have to try it out. Does it really work?
I saw you wearing those glasses, I guess, for VR.
So I tried the embodied VR, which put me into the shoes of an older grandmother with Alzheimer's. And that was a very powerful experience. And by doing that, I can understand the narrative and the power of that technology. There was also a bit of technology that got really hyped during the pandemic. It was this Japanese face mask that could translate what you say in about 8 different languages or something like that. I was like, this is too good to be true. Can you please ask him to send it over to us? And we sent it over, and, you know, it was a bit clunky. The translation was a bit buggy. So I was very honest with my review of the technology, but I think you also have to be generous as well. A lot of technology products are prototypes. You know, you cannot fault someone who dares to be a pioneer to build the first generation of something. There, you know, you have to also recognize, look, they were on the right track. This is interesting. This could turn into something else. Also, recently had the opportunity to be among the first journalists to try vegan seafood created by Omni Seafood here in Hong Kong. You know, completely plant-based crab, plant-based tuna, plant-based fish. On the day of the launch, I tried it out, and you know, it's for a product like that, which is a form of food tech, food innovation. I think tasting is part of the story. You really have to experience it. I had a fun experience though in South Korea when I had a chance to go to Samsung headquarters and try their digital cockpit. This is the sort of the smart interface that lies on top of the desktop that gives you additional information, so you have more situational awareness, as well as great entertainment features, you know, stuff like that. But it would be able to recognize when you have, you know, people coming out, to be able to avoid certain pitfalls or dangers, and then just more information on this like vast data screen, this data set that's in front of you. And to cover that, you really have to try it out to understand it. What I thought was really funny at the time was I didn't think it was kind of sprung upon me that they were going to give me this opportunity to try the digital cockpit. And they said that I was the first journalist to try the second iteration, the second generation of the technology. I thought that was really cool, but I'm a really bad driver. I don't know if you noticed, I got into an accident in the parking lot at Limbrook High School, Alice, and it ripped off the bumper of my parents' old Volvo station wagon. You do not want me to drive your multi-million-dollar prototype. But they didn't know it at the time. And fortunately, I was able to try it out. No one was hurt. Nothing went wrong.
Yeah, that's cool. And how did the vegan shrimp taste?
Well, I tried the vegan. I don't think they've tackled shrimp just yet. That would be the next innovation. The vegan crab was very crab-like in texture. And when you have it as sort of a crab cake form, when you fry it up, it really tastes like the real thing. You know how it's almost it's all about the texture, as well as the flavor, and also the handling. It has to be able to handle like the real meat. So if you're a chef in the kitchen and you're grabbing something that's plant-based versus something that's a real thing, you don't need to change your cooking time. So it could be prepared in a way that, you know, it's just as efficient as preparing something else. I think it's fascinating. The more I study about unsustainable seafood and the practices in the seafood industry, it makes me more and more think if I want to have more diversity in my diet, and if that is an option on the menu, I think, you know, I want to continue to be more plant-based. It's interesting.
Yeah. I'll ask one last question from the pre-written questions, and this is about the memorable story. So do you have like a single memorable news story or a few of them?
Yeah, this is funny. Whenever I'm asked, what is the most memorable story that you've covered so far? And this may sound a bit of a cheat, but I will say that I always say this, my answer is covering the rise of China. I think, especially, you know, tracking last 20 years, me working at CNN from Hong Kong, being able to travel extensively across Greater China, but also what China has achieved and how China has transformed over the last 2 decades. In the history books, when we look back at this moment of history, centuries from now, this will be seen as a very, very significant event. And I feel really fortunate to have been able to be here and to cover it in slow motion, and sometimes not so slow motion, over the last 20 years. Through CNN, we did our groundbreaking Eye on China series where we reported live on the ground in China for multiple shows. We also had the Countdown Beijing show just when China was getting ready to become much more international back in the day. This is before 2008, the Beijing Olympic Games. And then there was also the On China Current Events Roundtable discussion show where we tackled a number of very interesting, occasionally sensitive subjects with newsmakers and with experts about what was happening inside China that the rest of the world needed to know about. And multiple, live reporting trips over the years. 2017, I went to Beijing. That was when Donald Trump was in Beijing. Covered that event. That was when he and Melania were given the famous tour of the Forbidden City with Chinese President Xi Jinping and his wife. And the last time I was in China, in mainland China, was in 2019. I was there to cover the big National Day Parade on October 1, and also to interview a few titans of business who were visiting Beijing, including pretty big name in the hedge fund industry, Ray Dalio, who was and even now remains very, very bullish about the Chinese economy. I think, you do have a regulatory crackdown going on. You do have the economy significantly slowing down. But you do have this interesting trend happening in China where it is shifting its priority, especially in terms of technology, more towards strategic tech. China has recognized that this is its goal. It needs to beef up its semiconductor industry. It needs to beef up AI, quantum computing. It wants to be better at space. And so I think this is a reason why a lot of people, including Ray Dalio, are very, very bullish and confident about China going forward.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. There are a few questions in the chat. The first one is about social media. It's pretty long, but I've just read it a little, cursorily. The effects of social media, and this is not just about social media, but technology has positive effects, but also has some negative effects as well. So one of the things that's happening with social media is that people are not connected necessarily better. They're sometimes even disconnected, or they live in these bubbles. So what do you think about that? And what do you think in general about sort of the negative effects of technology?
Yeah, I think this has really come to the fore because of various reporting about the impact of social media, whether it's through news media or academics. Many of you may have seen the Netflix documentary Social Dilemma that came out a couple of years ago, and also what we've learned from the Facebook whistleblowers in recent weeks about the dangers that social media platform can pose. I mean, look, these devices are highly addictive, and these social platforms are highly addictive because they're very emotional, they're very reactive. Posts are rewarded if they get people to click on the angry emoji on it. Posts that do well are posts that elicit an emotive response, not necessarily oh, that was good analysis, I understand response. There is something inherently broken about the system that needs to be fixed. But there's also something inherently broken and needs to be fixed in ourselves. I think we need to learn how to be more patient, to be more compassionate, to be more willing to read and understand alternative points of view without shutting down people. And unfortunately, a lot of our tech tools makes it really easy for us to have that tunnel vision, to just stay focused on, this is the one thing I like, this is the news outlet that I like, this is the person that I like, as opposed to being able to widen that tunnel vision, to have a fuller scope of what the world really looks like. So I think it's change. There definitely needs to be change in the way that the social media platforms are managed, but also change among ourselves as media consumers about, that we do have this tendency, we do have this habit, and we need to correct it.
Yeah. So what can we do as technology researchers and developers? We can think about making our products to make people be more aware, to be more, diverse or open-minded. But is that enough? Are people going to have to be re-educated about how to use social media? Do we need to educate our kids? What are the solutions?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big proponent of education, of media literacy and social media literacy. So people from a young age are taught by their parents or by their schools about the power of these tools, and also given some limitations about when to use it and when it's appropriate and what's appropriate to say and to do. But Alice, I have to admit, like, I really want to continue a conversation with you about whether or not AI or machine learning can play a role here, because I mean, this is something completely beyond my understanding. Is there a way to identify when something is trending for the wrong reasons? Is there a way, when you have a social media platform at such a scale where you can't have human beings to go in and to manually qualitatively say, okay, this is wrong, this doesn't meet our standards, et cetera. Is there a way technology can come in and to make that almost qualitative call? That's something I'm fascinated about. Is there an algorithm for compassion? Can there be an algorithm for this can potentially hurt someone's feelings or could turn up into something else? I don't know.
Yeah, so that's a really tough but important question. Can we make an algorithm for compassion versus, can we make somebody who is a villain into somebody who is not a villain anymore? Yeah. I don't think that we have the technology to do so right now, but it is something that people in AI and machine learning research community are thinking about very, very hard. So we do have technology that detects bias, for example, right? So you know about the COMPASS system in the US, and there are ways to automatically detect that there is systemic bias here. And how do we get rid of bias when there is bias? And the bias is in the data, the bias is in the model, bias is in whoever is actually using the product or the AI service as well. So so we just need to make progress. It's pretty slow at the moment, but I think many more people are being interested or becoming interested. So I think within a few years, we may have some algorithms that are more compassionate than the current technology. Yeah,
I think what I really enjoyed about, and going back to fiction, what I really enjoyed about the book Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, which is about a relationship between an artificial friend and her, I guess, teenage human friend, is that the artificial friends are more compassionate and understanding and fair than their human counterparts. And it really is more of an indictment about human beings and how we need to improve. So we can't put the fault fully on the machine or on a social media platform. We also need to put it on ourselves. I mean, look at animal welfare and the way we treat living beings. Look at the way we're treating our planet. That's on us. That's not on technology. That's on us. And we need to be able to, somehow open up that third eye to get ourselves and other people just to care a little bit more. As we try to come up with technology solutions to solve the many problems that we have in this world.
Yeah. So here's a related question. What do you think is the best way to follow the changes of world from various perspectives?
Read as much as you can. And of course, your eyes get really tired. My eyes get very, very tired. Podcasts, listen to as many podcasts while you go out walking in nature, preferably. If you have a park nearby, and fire up a podcast and be able to have that moment where you can just step away from a screen and just listen to different voices and hear what's happening in different corners of the world, especially if it's something that's outside what you constantly read into every day. Of course, you are a specialist in a given area and you need to continue to deepen that expertise, but also outside of that, just expose yourself, and also to new experiences too. I know all of us are aching for the opportunity to be able to travel again. But when we travel again, maybe consider traveling to a place which is not just a
Top 10
grand hotel on a beach that could be anywhere else, but could really give you a sense of a different place, of a different culture, or a different experience. I think that could be really eye-opening.
Yeah. Just step out of your comfort zone, right?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, let me open up the floor. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and just speak your question, please do so. Oh, and well, while we wait for that, or actually let's have the Zoom hand raise. So students, you should know how to raise your hand virtually, so please do that. But for now, we have one question. So what are your thoughts on the abuse of tech, specifically regarding geopolitical relations in Hong Kong, facial recognition tech, social databases, and do such events give ground to the US government's current legislative attempt to crack down on big tech?
Yeah, there's tech for good and there's also tech for bad. And it's almost like and like what we've been discussing so far, we cannot just squarely blame the technology itself. It's also how we're interacting and exploiting and using that technology, right? And if we cannot help ourselves, then something needs to be done to curb that harmful interaction or harmful use of technology. Ideally, I like to think that comes from a place of engagement and education and raising awareness. I think a lot has been done in recent years about cyberbullying. And being able to recognize it, to call it out. If it happens, it's something that's taken seriously at school or in the workplace. A lot of that has to do with education and awareness. But there's only so much that can do. Then it becomes an issue of activism, or maybe to a certain degree, regulation. Either corporates need to step in and be able to regulate their own platform, their own technology, or if it becomes so extreme, governments with the guidance of experts who really know the best way to handle the situation, regulation can come in that form as well. But I always like to emphasize education and engagement, trying to have that conversation of like, let's recognize that this is a problem. How do we reduce this? Just to take that individual responsibility, because that way, it's people can own the solution themselves, and it's more effective in the long run.
Right. So recently, the Korean government was also criticized because they were using the faces of people coming into the country, like through the immigration, process at the airports, and that database had been either leaked. I don't know if it was intentional or unintentional, but that database of faces, just some company got hold of that, and so it's about our privacy and all that personal information that can be leaked to some people who may have very negative intentions.
Yeah, there's so much education that needs to take place about digital privacy.
Yeah.
Questions that consumers, most of us, quite frankly, are not asking right now, especially when we start traveling again and they're going to be, digitized, let's say, COVID vaccine passports. Yeah. If you travel to a certain country, can you trust that country has the firewall needed to protect your data? Can you trust that country is not going to take your data and turn around saying, actually, we need to make some money, let's sell it to a third party data broker so we can make some extra money? There's like a list of sort of digital good practices and rights that individuals we need to compile and make it universal, and we really have scratched the surface of this. Yeah.
I want to switch gears again a little bit and talk about metaverse. I know you've talked about the VR technology a lot, and the Alzheimer's, getting into her shoes, that was really, really fascinating. Do you think, and VR is just one part, as far as I understand, of this whole metaverse thing.
Yeah.
Have you heard much about it? Are you like going to do a story on it? What are your thoughts?
There's been like a lot of discussion about the metaverse. Like when I was interviewing the guy behind Black Box VR, he said that was when the metaverse, the Facebook rebranding itself as Meta announcement just came out, and he was really excited. He said, finally, people will understand what we're about. We are providing fitness solutions for the metaverse. For a while, I thought that the metaverse, I've been thinking about the metaverse in recent days. For a while, I thought the metaverse was going to be like that movie or that book, Ready Player One, or you have to put on the VR headset, maybe some peripherals, and you walk into a completely virtual alternative dimension where you have an avatar, you have, you know, a different life, different goals, etc. But then lately, I was talking to some friends about this. I'm thinking that we're already in a sort of metaverse. We're spending more and more of our time online. Right now, this conference that we're having, the way that we're connecting right now, whether it's how much time you spend on communicating with friends and family in a virtual place, or conducting business transactions, or getting your news information, or the way you like to present yourself, maybe with a filter on top, and that becomes your mental image of yourself, not your real world physical self. To a certain degree, we're already reaching that point when a number of us are spending, and I'm trying to limit it, quite a vast amount of our daily time in a virtual realm, or you know, as opposed to purely in the real world. Mm-hmm. So I almost feel that the metaverse is already here. Mm-hmm. It's just online. It's just and we're already just heading that direction as more and more of our lives become embedded into a non-real world and virtual sphere. I was joking with my colleague Anna Corin while we were having lunch. I said, maybe 20, you know, it's because both of us have, you know, been in the business for 20 years, like maybe 20 years from now, and we get like when CNN is in the metaverse, there'll be avatars of ourselves and people can select a Kristie from circa 2015 or an Anna from circa 2021 to present a news story or do a report. But in a way, that's already happening when you see live streamers in China using beauty filters to sell goods. They're making money completely virtually online with a completely virtual metaverse persona. So in many instances, the metaverse is already here.
Yeah, it feels like, do you remember back in the early 2000s when these home pages were first being created, right? And we had the first, browser, I forget what they were called, but like these browsers with these really, really ugly text-based HTML pages. And that was opening, and we were already using a lot of email too, right? So that, that was like the internet 0.1 version. And now you're saying, we're like in the metaverse 0.1 version, and it's going to kick up a notch and like become really fancy or like really useful and really easy to use in, I don't know, next year, 2 years from now.
Yeah. And also think about the number of friends you have who you've only interacted with them online.
Yeah.
You've never met them in person. Right. Or even family members you have blood relations with, who you probably see most of the time virtually and not in real life.
Yeah.
And it's almost, the metaverse becomes like that inflection point when it's like, we are, no longer, we just rely on the real world for our bare necessities. But we get our fulfillment, and we get our livelihoods, and we get our education, and we get our social engagement all in a virtual space.
Yeah, that sounds like the future, and it's coming up very soon.
Yeah.
So I think we should wrap up now. Are there any last, words you want to say before you go?
Yeah, just want to say thank you very much. In a way, this is kind of a return back to KAIST, but with all our discussions about virtuality and metaverse talk, I want to step foot back on campus one day. I really look forward to returning to South Korea. Alice, to giving you a big warm hug in person. But also I was very, I really do hope that we can keep in touch when you or your students do come up with anything you think like, hey, I think Kristie at CNN might be interested in this. This is bubbling up. This is an innovation. This is a trend. Please message me. Please let me know.
All right, I'll do that. Thank you so much again for joining us today, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care, guys. Bye.